11 cars started on the grid at the season opener this year, and that number will not change no matter how much money anyone offers to add a 12th. That fixed number is exactly why owning even a small slice of a team on this grid has become one of the most expensive tickets in professional sports. According to Forbes' most recent full valuation study, the average team on the grid is now worth about $3.6 billion. That average has climbed 89% in just 3 years, a pace few professional sports franchises anywhere have matched. Every single team on the grid, according to that same study, is now valued above $1.5 billion. Only 2 professional leagues anywhere post a higher average franchise value than this one: American football and basketball. A racing series with 11 teams is now sitting in financial territory usually reserved for leagues with 30 or more franchises. The obvious question is why? Nobody added new races fast enough, and prize money alone does not explain a jump this steep.
Part of the answer sits in a single word that shows up in almost every deal from the last 2 years: scarcity.
The grid has been effectively closed for most of the sport's modern history, with new entries requiring approval most sports leagues do not demand. When only 11 seats exist, and none of them are for sale outright, any fractional stake that does become available draws intense competition. Over the past 3 years, at least 6 of those 11 teams have sold a stake to a new outside investor. Each new deal resets the market's understanding of what a seat at this table is actually worth. This video walks through 4 of those deals in order, then steps back to explain the mechanism turning race cars into billion-dollar assets. Start with the deal that set the current benchmark, made not by a rival team owner, but by a technology executive. It involves one of the sport's most recognizable team principals selling a slice of his own holding company. In November of last year, the team principal of the Mercedes team began talks to sell a piece of his personal stake in the team. That team principal owns roughly a third of the Mercedes operation personally, separate from the shares held by the Mercedes car company itself. The buyer was the founder and chief executive of a major cybersecurity company, stepping into motorsport ownership for the first time. The structure was specific: a 15% stake in the team principal's own holding company, equal to about 5% of the team overall. That 5% slice alone valued the entire Mercedes team at roughly $6 billion. $6 billion set a new record valuation for a Formula One team at the time the deal was reported. It surpassed the previous high watermark, a rival team that had recently been valued around $4 billion. The team principal is expected to net around $300 million personally from selling that 15% slice alone. Buyer does not just write a check and walk away. He joins the team's strategic steering committee alongside its other top stakeholders. That steering committee already includes the Mercedes car company's own chairman and the founder of a major British chemicals and energy group. In exchange for his stake, the cybersecurity executive also becomes a technology advisor to the team's racing operation. A single outside investor now sits inside the room where Mercedes makes its biggest strategic calls purely by buying equity.
That is the pattern worth watching across this entire wave of deals. Money buys a seat, and the seat buys real influence.
Mercedes was not an isolated case. 3 more of the grid's most storied teams ran nearly the same play within the same 2 years. Rewind further back, and the pattern actually started with McLaren, years before the Mercedes deal made headlines. Back in 2020, an American investment group put roughly £185 million into McLaren's racing operation. That investment bought an initial 15% stake, which grew to about a third of the team by the end of 2022. 2 sovereign wealth funds, one from Bahrain and one from Abu Dhabi, later moved to buy out that entire minority position. That buyout, completed in 2025, valued McLaren's racing operation at somewhere between $4.7 and $5 billion. For the original American investors, that exit turned their £185 million stake into roughly 10 times its starting value.
A 10 times return over 5 years is a rare outcome in almost any private investment category, let alone one tied to a race car.
That single exit became the reference point every other team's investors now point to when negotiating their own valuation. 2 national wealth funds now hold a meaningful share of one of the sport's most recognizable teams, a structure once unusual in this sport. State-linked capital sitting inside a racing team's ownership table is no longer the exception across the grid, it is close to the norm. Alpine tells a messier version of the same story, and it is still unfolding as this video is being made. Back in 2023, an investment firm called Otro Capital bought a 24% stake in Alpine for $200 million. That deal valued the entire team at roughly $900 million at the time, a fraction of today's grid average. 3 years later, Otro Capital is looking to sell that same stake, and a former rival team principal has reportedly placed a bid. Alpine's own team boss has publicly cited an offer that would value the 24% stake at up to $3.5 billion. That figure, if it holds, would value the whole team nearly 4 times higher than independent analysts currently estimate. Forbes' own published estimate for Alpine sits closer to $2.5 billion, noticeably below the team boss's public claim. That gap between an owner's stated number and an independent analyst's estimate is common across this entire market right now. Nobody has an obligation to agree on what a private, unlisted racing team is actually worth until an actual sale closes. Until that Alpine sale closes, the honest answer is that its value is whatever the next signed contract says it is. Aston Martin's ownership timeline is the clearest single illustration of how fast this market has actually moved. Back in 2018, the team's controlling owner bought what was then a struggling midfield outfit for about $117 million. 5 years later, in 2023, an American investment firm called Arctos Partners bought a minority stake at a valuation near £1 billion. A year after that, 2 more American funds, HPS Investment Partners and Accel, injected further capital at an even higher valuation. That most recent round placed the team's enterprise value as high as $3.2 billion. $117 million in 2018 to more than $3 billion within roughly 7 years is close to a 30-fold increase. Just this month, the ownership table grew again. An American franchise owner from a completely different professional sports league bought a minority stake. That new investor already owns a minority stake in an English Premier League club, making this his second European football-adjacent sports investment in a year. He joins Aston Martin's board as vice chairman, focused specifically on growing the team's commercial presence in the United States market. No day-to-day racing decisions come with that board seat. The role is explicitly about sponsorship, marketing, and North American growth. Sportico's most recent published list places Aston Martin as the grid's 5th most valuable team at roughly $3 billion. 4 separate funding rounds in 7 years, each one pricing the team higher than the last, is not a coincidence. It is a trend line. Not every new name on the grid bought into an existing team. One brand new entrant had to pay simply for the right to exist. General Motors' Cadillac brand joined this season as the grid's 11th team, the first genuinely new entrant added in years. To do that, Cadillac agreed to pay $450 million, the highest entry fee in the sport's history. That fee is formally called an anti-dilution payment, compensating the 10 existing teams for permanently splitting the prize fund one way further. Split evenly, that $450 million works out to $45 million landing in each existing team's account before a single race. The very first version of this anti-dilution rule, written into the sports commercial agreement back in 2021, set the fee at $200 million total.
In 5 years, the price of simply joining the grid alone more than doubled, even before any car ever completed a single lap.
A second manufacturer took the opposite path, buying an existing seat outright rather than paying to create a new one. The German carmaker Audi completed a full takeover of an existing smaller team, rebuilding it entirely under its own name ahead of this season. Buying a seat that already exists and paying to add a brand new one both point to the identical underlying fact: there is no cheap way onto this grid anymore. At the very top of the grid's value table sits the team that has raced in every single season since the sport began. Forbes' most recent full ranking, published before Cadillac even joined the grid, placed Ferrari as the single most valuable team at roughly $6.5 billion. Ferrari's value comes less from recent race results and more from 8 decades of uninterrupted brand history. No rival team can replicate. A team can be bought, rebuilt, and renamed within a single season, the way Audi just did. 80 years of continuous history cannot be purchased at any price. That is the ceiling every other team on the grid is implicitly being measured against every time a new stake sale gets reported.
6 deals, 6 different structures, 1 shared conclusion. A fixed 11-team grid has turned every existing seat into scarce, appreciating property.
Step back from any single deal and the mechanism driving all of them is actually simple, borrowed straight from basic supply and demand. Supply is fixed at 11 teams. It has been fixed, in practice, for most of the sport's modern era, with entry requiring formal approval most leagues do not demand. Demand, meanwhile, keeps growing from an unusually wide mix of buyers: technology executives, private equity funds, sovereign wealth funds, and owners from other sports leagues entirely. Every one of those buyer types has a different reason for wanting in, but they are all competing for the exact same fixed set of seats. Compare that to a league that expands its number of franchises whenever demand grows, and the difference in pricing power becomes obvious immediately. A league that can simply add a 12th, 13th, or 14th franchise caps how scarce, and therefore how expensive, each existing seat can become. This sport has chosen the opposite path deliberately, treating grid size as something to protect rather than something to grow on demand. Cadillac's $450 million entry fee is not a punishment. It is the market openly pricing exactly how much that scarcity is worth. The sport's own commercial agreement, signed by every team, sets the rules for exactly how few seats can exist and what adding one more actually costs.
That agreement is renegotiated periodically among the teams themselves, meaning the existing owners collectively control how scarce their own asset stays over time.
In effect, the 11 teams already on the grid help set the price of admission for anyone hoping to become the 12th.
That is a genuinely unusual amount of pricing control for any group of private companies to hold collectively over their own competitive category.
None of this changes what happens on the actual track this weekend. Lap times, pit stops, and race results are unaffected by any of it. What it does change is who profits regardless of where a team finishes, simply by having bought equity before the next valuation reset.
6 different deals, 4 different teams, and one unmovable number, 11. That fixed grid size is the single variable explaining almost everything else in this story.
Watch the next stake sale on this grid, and the number to focus on will not be horsepower. It will be the size of the slice being sold. As long as the grid stays fixed at 11 and buyers keep lining up anyway, that valuation curve has no obvious reason to bend downward. Compound World covers the events, decisions, and power structures that shape the world: economics, finance, sports, and beyond. Grounded in real data, no hot takes, no manufactured outrage.